We will now have the panel Voices from Latin America. This session will be chaired by Ambassador R. Viswanathan, former Indian Ambassador to Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Venezuela, and Consul General in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We have with us Dr. Lia Diskin, writer and founder of Associação Pala-Plena, Brazil, who will be speaking on Gandhi and the ethics for the coexistence. We have our second panelist, Dr. Lia Rodriguez de la Vega, Working Group on India and South Asia, Asian Affairs Committee, Argentina Council for International Relations, Buenos Aires, Argentina, who will be speaking on Gandhi's reach in the enunciations and practices of peace in America. Our two speakers who will be joining us is Dr. Oscar Alvarez Araya, former Costa Rican diplomat, Costa Rica, who will be speaking on Gandhi and Latin America. And our final speaker panel is Dr. Beatrice Martinez Sarvedra, historian, National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, Mexico City, Mexico. She will be speaking on Gandhi and gender equality, a reading from Mexico. This will be followed by a brief question and answer session. I would take the opportunity to mention some house rules. All speakers or panelists are requested to mute themselves when not speaking. Questions will be taken during question and answer session. Panelists can ask questions to the speakers live through the raise hand option. Questions can also be asked by registered attendees live by typing in the chat box. These will be visible to all panelists. Questions may be kept brief and to the point. In case you are facing connectivity issues, you may switch off the camera and continue on audio mode. I would now request Ambassador Viswanathan to kindly conduct the proceedings. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good evening and buenos días, amigos de América Latina, y buen día, galera brasileira. In one of my lectures in Buenos Aires, I was talking about the diversity of India, how we have 18 official languages, so we have difficulty in understanding each other. One of the Argentines stood up and said, Ambassador, in Argentina we speak only one language, but still we don't understand each other. I was a member of the Jockey Club in Buenos Aires, very exclusive, elitist. There they were speaking a different language. They would talk about summer vacation in Punta del Este, winter vacation in Bariloche, skiing, shopping in Miami, and prices of properties in US dollars. But out in the streets, the Peronistas and the masses would shout about inequality, injustice, and the high prices of bread in peso. So recently when I was in Jockey Club, my Jockey Club friends told me this story that when they had the elections, Krishna, the leftist, Peronist, ex-president, he was passing by the side of Jockey Club during her election campaign. And suddenly there was a boy from inside the compound of Jockey Club. He raised his hand and said, victory to Krishna, victory to Peronism, Viva Peronism. And she was shocked. Her followers were shocked. Here is a boy from the oligarchic Jockey Club who is cheering for the victory of the leftists. So they were shocked and surprised. So somebody went to him and said, you have taken us by surprise. Why do you support a leftist president while your father and the club are all rightists? He said, my father does not like Krishna. He does not like leftists. He thinks it is bad for his business. And he says, if Krishna and the leftists win the elections, he will shift the business to Miami and he will take the family also to Miami. I love Miami. That is the difference in in language in Argentina. But of course, the Argentines have an explanation for everything. So one of my Peronist friends, he quoted the late President Perón, who said, "La única verdad es la realidad. The only truth is the reality." Well, the reality of Latin America of today is violence. That is one of the main reasons for the extra interest taken by Latin America in Gandhi's preachings and practice of non-violence. The violence has been in the region generated by revolutions, ideological collisions, drug and gang wars. There have been three kinds of violence: state violence, people's violence against the state, and criminal violence. Now, the state violence, as you all know, had been practiced by the military dictatorships in the name of anti-communism and patriotism. They had killed and tortured and disappeared thousands of people. In Argentina, they used to take the leftist prisoners in the planes and throw them out of the plane into the sea. In Uruguay, the military dictatorship had imprisoned Jose Mujica, the ex-president, who was a guerrilla fighter, for 14 years. Out of the 14 years, in 2 years, they put him in the bottom of a dry well. And he was going mad, and he was put there for 2 years. And Mujica says, "That is when I learned to speak to frogs," to keep up his sanity. There is the people's violence. Thousands of people in Latin America, across from Mexico to Chile, got inspired by Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, and Karl Marx, and took to arms rebellion and insurgents to bring about a utopian socialism, believing in more in bullets than in ballots. Now, these hundreds of thousands of people included even Catholic bishops. Catholic bishops who worked in the lower level clergy, who worked in the barrios and the slum areas. They adopted this new doctrine of liberation theology and thought it was their duty to protect the poor and exploited. And they took up arms and they got killed. Now, the most iconic of these Catholic bishops who became a guerrillero was Camilo Torres, Colombia, the most famous one. He became a revolutionary of ELN guerrilla group and he was killed in combat. But he is remembered for his most famous quote when he said, "If Jesus were born today, he would have become a guerrilla fighter." And Latin America probably has more students from the university and the high school who participated in these revolutionary activities, took to guns and took bullets, much more than any other region in the world. It's amazing. And not only students, professors too. There was a professor in Peru who professor of philosophy, unleashed massive and brutal violence against the state and the people. Professor of philosophy, his name is Guzman. Remember? Sendero Luminoso, the shining path leader. And he was finally brought down by another professor, a professor of maths, His name is Fujimori. And he unleashed state violence against the guerrillas. And hundreds and thousands of poets, intellectuals, and writers also took up the armed struggle. And the most iconic one is El Salvador's Roque Dalton, who was killed and assassinated by his own comrades who were rivals. And if you look at the Sandinista revolution, Ortega, his wife Murillo, his brother Humberto, and a whole lot of his cabinet members, they are all revolutionaries. It's amazing. And then there is this violence, criminal violence by drug gangs, drug cartels, and gangs. In Mexico, you see day in and day out killings and massacres by drug cartels. In Central America, gangs, including the famous Mara gangs, they are on a rampage, holding the whole society to ransom. And big cities like Rio, Sao Paulo, and Mexico City have become unsafe and insecure because of a combination of all kinds of violence. So it is in this context that Latin America is looking at Gandhian ideals with a practical view to see how they can use these tools to sow the seeds of non-violence and peace in the young minds and control the hardened minds of criminals and police. Now, we will start with Brazil. In Brazil, you had this famous poet, Cecilia Meirelles. She visited India in 1953. When she came, she gave a statement saying, foreigners come to India for many reasons, to see Taj Mahal, temples, or experience the culture. But I have come to India for Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi. She participated in a conference on Gandhi, an international conference, and spoke on the topic of Gandhi, a Brazilian point of view. And she made a very famous statement saying that Gandhi had awakened the conscience of mankind. When Gandhi died, she wrote an elegy saying, when the tarde, vem, e vai, the India of Brazil, the afternoon wind, that is the Gandhian spirit, blows from India to Brazil. I'm so glad to see that the afternoon wind from India continues to flow from India to Brazil thanks to Leah Diskin and their Palace Athena. They have been celebrating Gandhi Jayanti for 38 years, and this is the 39th year. It is not a celebration of just garlanding or a few speeches. They do meaningful, practical things to take the message of Gandhi's nonviolence and the peace to school children, teachers, to juveniles, to people in prison, to police. So I am so happy to see Professor Leah Diskin, who in her personal and professional life lives like Gandhi with an austere life and completely committed to public service. So with this, I think I would, my time is up, 10 minutes. So I would like to invite Professor Leah Diskin to give her talk.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your kind words. Honorable Vice President of India, Shri Venkaiah Naidu, distinguished authorities and panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I am deeply honored to take part of this memorable encounter to celebrate the legacy of Gandhi's life and inspiration, which to these days mobilize humankind to transform this planet in a home where all forms of existence, both living and inanimate, can coexist with mutual respect and validation. Before I start, I would like to express my sincerest gratitude to Ambassador Vishwanathan for his invaluable cooperation during his time as a diplomat in Latin America, especially in Brazil, and in 1996, the first consulate of India was created in São Paulo, and a fruitful and intense cultural dialogue was established between our two countries. Despite the applying violence we were witness along the 20th century, it was also the stage of significant progress. The end of the formal colonialism, the vote for women, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the interreligious dialogue introduced by the Second Vatican Council and amplified by the World Conference of Religion for Peace, the United Nations First World Conference on the Human Environment, the struggles for civil rights and against the apartheid, etc. Fortunately, this list is very long. The Mahatma was a visionary and had the foresight of the structured needs for a healthy coexistence between humans and with the natural environment which sustain all of us. In his own words, the world has enough for everyone's needs, but not everyone's greed. Another point, I have suggested that woman is the incarnation of ahimsa. Ahimsa means infinite love, which again means infinite capacity for suffering. Let her transfer that love to the whole humanity. It is given to her to teach the art of peace to the warring world. This was a point in the newspaper Harijan in 1940. The tolerance gives us a spiritual discernment that is so distant from fanatism as the North Pole from the South. True knowledge of religion destroys the barriers between one and another creed and give rise to tolerance. As we cultivate tolerance toward other beliefs, we gain a deeper understanding of our own. This was published in Young India in 1930. A person who was material or moral health does it only at the expense of other members of society. If so, does he have the moral right to use it primarily for his own personal profit? No, he doesn't have this right. Published in Harijan in 1947. But Gandhi was as that these guiding principles for our way of being in this world cannot be imposed by rules, laws, or regulation. They might spring from education, from an ethical commitment that can only last if it comes from the free and conscious will. The lack of ethics is deadly. Corruption kills. To hide and manipulate information in public affairs also leads to death. Difference in face of social inequality that causes suffering leads to the perpetuation and unfair exclusion and discrimination that believe all of us without exception. Presuming we become human but learning from another humans, and that within us there is a space of liberty for conscious choice, we should decide which values will guide our choices and decisions. The golden rule is a compass always at our avail. Treat others as you would wish to be treated. Each one of us is the outcome of endless interconnections, be it material, biological, cultural, or spiritual connection. All that exists in this universe depends on relationships, from atomic particles that share energy, or ecosystems that share food chains. We do not exist. We coexist. Or, once again, as Gandhi put it, all that exists is your neighbor. In order to give life to the lessons of the Mahatma, Plaza Association has created several programs. I would like to describe very briefly only a few of them. In 1982, and every year since, we celebrate the Gandhi's Week, always during the first week of October. Public venues, schools, parks, auditoriums will organize talks, plays, workshops and activities to teach Gandhian principles and to make Gandhi more known to the public in general. Countless partners throughout Brazil in many cities have joined in and now help to disseminate non-violence and simplest living Brazilians. Another program, one of these events involved the military and civil police forces in São Paulo. In 1998, 82,600 military police officers, as well as 42,000 civil police officers, attend seminars and receive materials on Gandhi and non-violence, and then took part in an essay writing contest. Another project, Fundação Casa, is a network of correctional facilities for young people sentenced to confinement or rehabilitation. Since 2006, we have been offering the interns seminars on Gandhi and Gandhian principles. These seminars are a creative, interactive, and artistic way of conveying the message of nonviolence. As of 2018, we have also been offering seminars to the staff of this correctional network of institutions. Another program, the Gandhi Network, Health, Culture of Peace and Nonviolence. This initiative was born from the partnership with the National Council of Municipal Health Departments and counted of the institutional support of UNESCO. Its goal is contribute to the reduce of violence and dissemination of the values of culture of peace and non-violence throughout Brazil. This is a few examples on how we work with
There have been a problem with the network. We're trying to fix it up as the Hello? There have been a network problem. I think we will have to. Ambassador Vishwanathan, can you hear me?
This is Hushang from Oman. I can hear you, but I
You can-
cannot see, or I can hear you, but I cannot see or hear anybody else.
Okay. We are trying to fix that up.
Thank you.
No. आशीष शुक्ल बोला नो.
नो आवाज नहीं जा रही है.
Yes.
आवाज लिख रहे हैं ना वो.
I think we will have to.
No, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you.
We'll have to log out once and log in once more with using the same link.
Everybody?
The blue jeans crashed. For that reason.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Everybody?
Everybody needs to log in, first log out, and then log in by using the same link again.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, he's there. Fine. Thanks. Okay.
My apologies.
Yeah, no, there was some connection problem.
Okay. I was telling about how the Argentines, they are the most avaricious readers of books from around the world. They have the best bookshops in every street corner. And they not only read, but they discuss, analyze, debate in cafes and taxis and everywhere. In 1941, there was a 10-year-old boy from a poor family. He was selling old newspapers in Plaza de Mayo, next to the president's house, the famous Plaza. And he was very popular because he was very nice and pleasant to all the other vendors there. So one of the vendors of old books, he started liking him and gifted him a book. Many books, and one of the books was book on Gandhi. The boy read that book, got inspired by it, and then later as an adult, he stood up to the military dictatorship defending human rights and people. And he even won a Nobel Prize for peace, Adolf Perez Esquivel. And the other one who popularized Gandhi in Latin America is the one and only Argentine muse of Tagore, Victoria Ocampo. She wrote articles on Mahatma Gandhi in 1924. In 1931, she met Gandhi personally in Paris in one of the meetings. And she was so overwhelmed because she saw how this simple and humble Gandhi with very few clothes, he impressed and overwhelmed the overdressed, fashionable Parisians. And she wrote about it. So we have Leah from the Argentina of Adolf Perez Esquivel and Victoria Ocampo. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation and congratulations for the organization to ICWA and all the colleagues here. Thank you very much. I will share the screen. Okay.
You have to unmute.
Please mute your mic.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I will read and I have to take our time, 15 minutes. So while the preaching of active nonviolence can already be found in India before the Christian era, with the mention of Ashoka, Mahavira, and Buddha, Teixeira rescues also the antecedent of its existence in Western history in Rome about the 5th century before Christ. Is it okay, the sound?
I think it's okay. You can go on. Yeah.
Thank you. It is worth noting that the term nonviolence has recorded different spellings, as you can see in this slide. The first, nonviolence, which could be confused with without violence. The second, nonviolence isolated, originated in the interpretation of the English colonialist about the forms of response of Gandhi and his followers, with a particular profile of persuasion, pressure, and resistance linked to a functional sense of struggle without weapons. And finally, the third version, as you can see, which can be attributed to Aldo Capitini, who alludes to the ethical religious precept of ahimsa and the struggles of Gandhi and his followers, identifying it with satyagraha, thus taking distance from the emphasis on violence and stressing its aspects as a constructive and open program of both justice and emancipation. Here I have some images from Gandhi in South Africa and when he came back to India, as we all know. And when we talk about Gandhi's influence in the United States, World War I was the breakdown of confidence in the triumph of progress and European humanistic values, resulted in the United States entering the war with the leadership of President Wilson. In that context, and addressing the dissemination of Gandhi's ideas in the United States, Descartes highlights as the first relevant indication of the influence of active nonviolence the message given from his pulpit by the Unitarian pastor John Haynes Holmes, well-known peace activist, in 1915, announcing that as a pacifist, he was prepared to resist the participation of the United States in the World War, adding that Gandhi, unknown to most of his audience, had addressed three needs in his life: spirituality and pacifism, throughout knowledge of the wounds inflicted by Western imperialism, not only in India but also in the West itself, and a method to save the world from self-destruction. Reddy states that Gandhi and his satyagraha were barely known in the United States until 1920, except for some articles by Myron Phelps of Irish origin. This decade marked the greatest attention to and knowledge about Gandhi and his movement in India by the United States, and Walker, a founding member of the World Peace Brigades, points to a sermon by Holmes in 1920, which was named The Christ of Today, in which he exposed his discovery of Gandhi, and another sermon of 1922, Who is the Greatest Man in the World Today, referring also to Gandhi. According to Scalmer, Gandhi's political creativity made him a regular subject of reports since the early 1920s as the head of an extensive movement whose methods drew the attention of Western journalists. In 1930, Time magazine dubbed Gandhi Man of the Year, as you can see here, and that year alone, the New York Times published more than 500 articles about him. In a sort of correlation, Gandhi began receiving numerous letters from Americans as well as visits in his ashram, which led him to express in an interview in 1926, "I have visitors from America almost every day with a real interest to learn about my ideas." Besides that, Gandhi's autography was first published in the United States in Unity magazine, of which Holmes was the editor, and then we have some books by Romain Rolland, Charles Freer Andrews, the one by Richard Butler Gregg, extended by Martin Luther King Jr., and referred to by critics as the Bible of the peace movements. On the other hand, the book of Krishnalal Jetalal Sridharani, a participant in the Salt March, constitute a valuable exposition of the methods of direct nonviolent action, emphasizing that satyagraha was a method of struggle and persuasion. The very circumstances of World War II constitute a challenge to the United States peace movement. At that time, in addition to moving forward, Rufus Jones, the founder of American Friends Services Committee, also focused on debates and proposals regarding the type of movement that would be relevant to the post-war period and peace conditions. Of course, we all know the influence Gandhi had in Martin Luther King Jr., and in the case of that influence, it had been pointed out that it was of an indirect character. Two episodes were mentioned by King. First of all, a lecture by A.J. Most on the implication of nonviolence in the Christian Church, which he attended during his course at the Crowther Seminary, and a monthly interracial and interreligious meeting in Philadelphia, in which Mordecai Johnson, president of Howard University, who had just returned in 1949, spoke about the importance of Gandhi. This article was published by King himself in 1968, and in addition to that, King made a journey to India in 1959, invited by Prime Minister Nehru. His impressions also resulted in an article published in the Ebony magazine, and after, if we have time, it would be good to quote him because it's very moving. Comparing both Gandhi's and King's legacies, Nogin points out that their style of nonviolent resistance is still in practice worldwide. In fact, both men are larger-than-life figures. Theirs is a legacy of eternal and unlimited potential applicability, one for all ages. Concerning the Gandhi's speech at the United Nations, there are many things to say, but I only want to mention some. For example, in 1993, the United Nations General Conference issued a resolution that envisaged activities around Gandhi, stating that his thoughts and creative method of nonviolent action had shaped both socio-economic and political views in the 20th century. This implies subsequent actions, which including, for example, the adoption of member state of UNESCO of the Declaration of Principles of Tolerance, and that same year, the United Nations organizations established November 16 as the International Day of Tolerance. In 2007, a United Nations resolution endorsed a proposal enunciated on occasion of the International Conference on Peace, Nonviolence and Empowerment, and October the 2nd was established as the International Day of Nonviolence, and this resolution points out that this day is an occasion to spread the message of nonviolence also through education and public awareness, reasserting the universal relevance of the principle of nonviolence and the desire to ensure a culture of peace, tolerance, understanding, and nonviolence. When we talk about Gandhi's reach in Latin America, while different authors address the arrival of India in Latin America through various texts, translations, and other references, Tevez Valdez, the author from Chile, finds different edges in the arrival of Gandhi's ideas in Latin America. Within the contextual framework, he points out that towards the beginning of the 20th century, there was the emergence of a specific generation that can be observed who had developed an emphasis on the spiritual and ethical aspect of the discourse, calling on youth to react against Saxon positivism. According to the author, Gandhi's ideas were linked to that Philo-Orientalist context close to theosophy cultivated by public figures such as Gabriela Mistral, Amado Nervo, José Vasconcelos, articulating with those the father already accepted, such as Tolstoy, Annie Besant, Rabindranath Tagore, and Romain Rolland. In addition to this, other characters became interested in Gandhi's political dimension, such is the case of Mariátegui, the Peruvian author, very well known all over the world. Tevez Valdez points out that already in 1920s, numerous figures of Latin American intellectual were looking towards a wider world, and that Gandhi was part of some lines of thought which were significant in later re-elaborations, which included personalities like that of Victoria Ocampo, the ambassador mentioned before. Already in 2000, Tevez Valdez points out that Gandhi appears associated with environmental and anti-consumerist position with the civil society and with more ethical and at the same time more pragmatic position. But I want to consider a special consideration for the case of the Service for Peace and Justice, which is called, was defined as an organization that was inspired by the movements of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., created in order to overcome social injustice. Since 1974, it groups 12 Latin American countries which, inspired in the culture of peace and the defense of human rights, assume the methodology of conflict resolution through active nonviolence. Those 12 countries are Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, and Uruguay. SERPAG is today a consultative NGO at the United Nations Economic and Social Council, and is also an advisory agency of UNESCO on Education for Peace, awarded with the UNESCO Prize for Education for Peace in 1987. It originated in a small group of committed nonviolent Christians who were part of the ARC community influenced by Lanza del Basto, a very well-known Gandhian man. For several years, it was called the Service for Liberating Action in Latin America, of nonviolent origin. They were groups inspired by these ideas in different Latin American countries. In that decade, the European Gandhians Jan and Hildegard Gosmeyer arrived in the region. They were a couple of Dutch pastors who had remarkable influence in the incipient movements and were referees for the International Fellowship of Reconciliation. Beginning in 1969, they organized a kind of coordination or secretariat office in Montevideo, in charge of which was Methodist pastor Earl Smith. In 1966, he organized there the first international consultation named Christian Nonviolence in the Latin American Revolution. In 1974, there was a meeting in Medellin, Colombia, attended by bishops, pastors, members of religious institutions, laity, and representatives of social-based movement, in which three axes of work were established and on which CEPAC was created. First, the commitment to the oppressed in the search for integral respect for human rights in order to build a more just and fraternal society. Second, living the gospel with the poor. And third, nonviolent orientation. The service appointed, as Ambassador mentioned, Adolfo Pérez Esquivel, whom you can see at the slide, as secretary for the subcontinent. And in 1980, Adolfo Pérez Esquivel was awarded, as Ambassador said, the Nobel Prize for Peace for his commitment to the defense of democracy and human rights by nonviolent means against military dictatorships in Latin America. In 2018, within the confluence of religion and politics, the broader sense of the word, Pérez Esquivel issued a joint declaration with Daisaku Ikeda, very well-known Japanese leader, resuming positions of Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi in an appeal to a new world based on justice and solidarity. Pérez Esquivel's unrestricted adherence to nonviolence is reflected in his high regard of Gandhi, highlighting the confluence of religion and politics. And I quote, Mahanma managed to combine religion and politics and to make his action consistent with spirituality. His ethical principles were the force that drove him to break the spiral of violence and to generate new collective awareness in his people. His whole political attitude had a strong spiritual basis, which allowed him to endure long fasts and long walks and master a silence that was heard everywhere. One of the fundamental axes of his controversy focused on the sense of the law and the possibility of resisting injustice and unjust law. With regard to other initiatives of active nonviolence in Latin America, Patela addresses the nonviolent struggles of the family of victims in Mexico together with the Solidarity civil society between 2011 and 2013, in particular, the movement for peace with justice says or points out that Latin America has been a laboratory for innovative strategic nonviolent action and mentions the case of the Regional Institute for the Study and Practice of Strategic Nonviolent Action in the Americas, developed by 4 institutions in Ecuador. Also in Ecuador, there is the case of Nonviolent October, a project born within the civil society by a group of individuals interested in promoting a humanistic approach to a culture of peace and active nonviolence and carry out various activities. For my final notes, I would like to say, thus coinciding with Cantoggio, it can be said that the slogan of nonviolence was part of an international movement of Christians and peace activists that also reached America, stimulating the pacifist and anti-nuclear pulse while resisting racial segregation in the United States and encouraging the formation in Latin America of a network that articulated different experiences and contributed to liberate others, such as CEPAC, whose nonviolent approach, opposed to the spirit of time, resulted in an active attitude of denunciation in the face of the faithful state repression. In his influence on the various enunciations and practices of peace, manifested through different examples in America, Gandhi constitutes a formidable projection of soft power from India, while an amalgamation of different space-times around a fundamental idea: non-violence as the dynamic of personal and collective construction. And in so doing, he continues to establish stronger, deeper, and much more meaningful relations than what becomes evidence to us between India and the rest of the world. A relationship that, as you can see, has been operating for a long time in the very construction of who we are. Gandhi appears in this way as a polysemic figure, not exempt of contradiction or criticism, a symbol of desirable times and state of active non-violence, stating that the reality of the symbol is not exhausted in its function of significance, but also constitute a means of intervention in the world and a power device, thus becoming an ever-contemporary collective presence and memory, himself an imperfect Gandhian, surpassed only by the construction of his own example as a beacon with an underlying unwavering faith in the potential of mankind within the innumerable dimensions of peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. You hear me?
Yes, I hear, Ambassador.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Our colleague from Costa Rica, I still don't see. So we will go to Mexico. Our next speaker, Dr. Beatrice Martinez Sarvedra, is from Mexico, the land of Octavio Paz, who introduced India to Latin America through his book Vislumbres de la India. He wrote poems on Lodi Garden and Madurai Meenakshi Temple. And he got married, his second marriage, under a neem tree in his house in Prithvi Raj Road in New Delhi. So Indian. Marriage under a neem tree. And Mexico is also the land of, you won't believe, Arjuna. They had a president called President Francisco Madero. He is called the Arjuna of Mexico because he faced dilemmas like Arjuna faced in the war between Pandavas and the opponents. And he studied Bhagavad Gita, he wrote commentaries, and he didn't solve his dilemma successfully, but he went through the dilemma and wrote about it. So he is called as the Arjuna of Mexico. So now we have Beatrice from Mexico. Welcome. Please take the floor.
Thank you. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Well, good evening, good morning. I'm very pleased to take part in this webinar about Gandhi. So I would like to share with you some reflections about Gandhi and his ideas on gender equality. So no doubt, Gandhi is a fundamental figure in the world's political and historical landscape. Multiple readings of Gandhi reveal him as a complex figure appraised by numerous interpreters. The fascination Gandhi arises is in parallel with his transcendence, evident in a vast corpus exploring his contributions in many respects. Beyond the idea of Gandhi as a legend or as a nationalist icon, his struggle methods and his views on politics and ethics became influential worldwide. At the same time, his scheme for the improvement of vulnerable sectors of society was path-breaking since it helped to infuse self-confidence to rather marginalized actors. Social reform, in fact, has been one of the most significant aspects of Gandhi's agenda, either to dignify Dalits or low castes or for the upliftment of women. Thus, the concert of this presentation is to revisit Gandhi's ideas on women and the project he visualized for their liberation. We can contend that aspects of Gandhian thought about women and their role and status in society are most pertinent and still valid nowadays, since there is an enduring gap of gender equality that is most necessary to overcome. As in many other aspects, Gandhi admits diverging readings in terms of gender equality. There cannot be a simplified monolithic understanding since constant tension and complexities can be traced in his thought. However, a central notion Gandhi focused on about women was their historical oppression at the hands of men. Likewise, he also ascribed an important role to the female sector as creative actors participating in politics to engage in the nationalist struggle, a view that broke with the pervasive conception of the domestic sphere as the woman's place par excellence. All this in a social context where heated discussions about women were taking place, but without female voices defining their own role and projects. So, female agency is a key issue in Gandhi's consideration. Thus, I quote, "In a plan of life based on non-violence, woman has as much right to shape her own destiny and man has to shape his." This is a quote by Gandhi. So in his view, it was men who made women to believe they were inferior. Then, Gandhi saw as necessary the regeneration of Indian women, misconceived by men who had thought, I quote, to be the lords and masters of women, instead of considering them as their friends and co-workers, end of quote. His criticism about society and its vices regarding women pondered the different platforms that produce this state of affairs. He denounced legislation as mostly the handiwork of men, which is why law was not always fair to women who were most of the time in a helpless state. According to Gandhi, both custom and law had suppressed women and their rights. Moreover, he points out Hindu scriptures, Shastras and Smritis as responsible of women's lack of freedom and called to remove their blemishes to promote the regeneration of the female sector. His idea of regeneration envisioned a pedagogy for women. If they, I quote, have been taught to regard themselves as the slaves of men, end of quote, there was the imperative to provide education and instruction to women, and this could be implemented first by their husbands. Thus, Gandhi stated, there is no justification for men to deprive women or to deny them equal rights on the ground of their illiteracy. But education is essential for enabling women to uphold these natural rights, to improve them and to spread them. This way, Gandhi's progressive standpoint reveals a departure from previous reformist perspectives about the role of the female sector. He saw them as relevant actors both within family, that is to say the domestic sphere, but also in politics. In addition, he was able to see the multifactorial dimension of gender gap produced from law, religion, custom, or education, spheres that had to be transformed in order to be more inclusive and fairer to women. This way, Gandhi thought inimical customs such as dowry, child marriage, or forced and girls' widowhood had to be eradicated since they reduce woman's dignity, or in Gandhian words, they dishonor womanhood. And education had to be implemented not only for women. Gandhi suggested re-education of men to remove supremacist male notions affecting men-women relations. Denunciation of male oppression, recognition and promotion of women's agency, visualization of women as subjects and not only as recipients of humanitarianism were some liberal premises Gandhi alluded to for the emergence of the new woman he had in mind. On the other hand, if Gandhi's modernity is evident in many respects, his thinking also reflects his social milieu. Tension between his progressive ideas and his traditionalism is evident and inhabits a context inclined to essentialize, supposedly feminine attributes. For instance, when it comes to purity, there is a noticeable ambivalent stance. So I quote, and why is there all this morbid anxiety about female purity? Have women any say in the matter of male purity? We hear nothing of women's anxiety about men's chastity. Why should men arrogate to themselves the right to regulate female purity? It cannot be superimposed from without. It's a matter of evolution from within and thereof of individual self-effort. It is not that Gandhi encouraged freedom in sexual matters. Rather, he argued in favor of man and woman's chastity as an expression of evolution. Purity should be preserved by both. So even though there is no liberal view on this question, there was, to some extent, a demand for both man and woman to preserve purity on the same basis. However, when it comes to violation, female purity and honor seem to be the most important features of womanhood. In such a case, according to Gandhi, woman had to fight with all her strength to prevent being raped and, I quote, if need be, die in the effort. As Sujata Patel refers, Gandhi and his construct are rooted in the social pattern and ideologies of the historical moments in which he lived. At a time when colonialism had established some parameters to measure the level of civilization in a society, women's status was taken as an indicator. The question then was, the more oppressed a woman, the less civilized a society. Thus, the question on women was central to Indian nationalism. Partha Chatterjee refers how the nationalist movement, in its interaction with colonialism, identified two clear domains: an outer public sphere of politics, economy, and technology, and an inner domain of spiritual matters. And if it was assumed that West was superior in material arena, India's spiritual superiority was undeniable. An Indian woman had a major role to play. She was conceived as the preserver of tradition, and her image vis-a-vis Western woman embodied the attributes of purity and virtue, that is, the sine qua non for the moral greatness nationalism visualized. But with Gandhism, for the first time and for the sake of the nation, women could go beyond domesticity. Gandhi encouraged the female sector to leave the domestic space and join the nationalist struggle. Although even from home, women could develop nationalist activities, for instance, teaching children to love nation or to stop communal sentiment. In the Gandhian scheme of women, all of them could participate, from married women to widows, whom Gandhi almost venerated for their endurance and sacrifice, and single women were able to undertake constructive work for society. However, under no circumstances when leaving the household, women were to develop the same activities than men, but specific tasks considered to be adequate for them, such as spinning khadi in the non-cooperation movement. Since for Gandhi, equality of sexes does not mean equality of occupations. Therefore, gender-based work specialization was advocated by him. At the same time, the pedagogical project aimed at women Gandhi had in mind was a proper education of women, one that did not mimic men, since there was no confusion between equal rights of both sexes and the activities both men and women were entitled to. Thus, the tension of Gandhian thought about women's status and the role is and their status and role is apparent and oscillates from liberal views to traditionalism. Then Gandhi's scheme essentialized women's activities and a theoretical female nature, which gave continuity to social normative framework. But his contributions to vindicate women as subject, to acknowledge their agency, rights, and social equality cannot be ignored. One of the main criticisms to Gandhi to Gandhian emancipatory projects for women was, according to Madhur Keshwar, that he failed to see oppression as a historical construct embedded in production relations. Instead, he conceived oppression as an outcome of a lack of moral condition. No doubt, an accurate remark, but gender inequality is a multifactorial issue. Thus, if a systemic dimension of the problem is undeniable, its everyday life impact is deeply evident, with a number of adverse cultural attitudes such as small-scale chauvinistic acts or open expressions of domestic violence that demand urgent attention. In this, Gandhian ideas about re-education of both male and female sectors could help raise awareness about equal status and rights. A pedagogy to teach and spread ethical notions has its limitations, but every action to eradicate gender inequality is essential at every single level. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Still no news of Costa Rica. Okay, thank you very much. Anyway, since we talked about Gandhi and women, I can't resist the temptation of telling an Argentine joke. There's an Argentine macho. He meets God and thanks him. He says, God, you made my wife great cook. She makes the best food. The God says, yes, son, I did it so that you love her. And he says, God, she's so kind, she's so affectionate. God says, yes, son, I made her so that you love her. And the Argentines don't stop. He went on. God, she's so generous. She looks after me, my family, my friends. The God says, yes, son, I did it so that you love her. And the Argentine says, can I ask one more question? Go ahead. God, why did you make her so stupid? God says, son, I did it so that she loves you. That is the Argentine thing. Okay. Now we open the session for questions. If anyone raises the hand or see in the chat.
So there might be questions in the chat box.
Yeah, there is a question from Sankuta Bhattacharya. Did Latin American dictatorships result in any Gandhian kind of leadership? But before I give it to you, I want to make a comment on this, and that is people like Adolf Perez Esquivel used the Gandhian principle of peaceful resistance against the military dictatorship. And also there is the other, the Madres de Plaza de Mayo, the mothers of Plaza Mayo. That's an amazing story, where you have this brutal Argentine dictatorship which is killing, torturing and disappearing people. And these mothers who lost their children, in 1977, they form a group, they walk around in the Plaza de Mayo next to the president's palace every Thursday with a white scarf with the names of the children who have disappeared or got killed. And it catches national attention and international attention. And these brutal military dictators, they abduct the founder of this Madres de Plaza and two other ladies and torture them, kill them, and one of them was even thrown from the plane into the sea. Till the mothers of Plaza de Mayo did not stop. They continued. That is courage. That is courageous civil resistance. That's what Gandhi said. non-violence is not an act of cowardice, it is an act of courage. So Mahatma Gandhi would have been very, very proud of these mothers, the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo. I leave it to the two Leahs and Beatrice to add to this.
Not only Madres de Plaza de Mayo, but also sons and daughters today. There's a lot of people from military dictatorship being judged up to now. And even today, they continue with the non-violence, the active non-violence resistance. It's really impressive and hard to believe how they manage to live and continue looking for their relatives. Some of them, they had their babies and all that. Well, it's very well known, the terrible history about this, but also the sons and daughters of these disappeared people continue this active nonviolence. And about the translation of Gandhi's writing in Spanish and Portuguese, I don't know Portuguese, but Spanish, I think, I don't know if people in India is aware of the how spread the Gandhian figure is all over the world. Really, maybe people is not aware of many details about India, but Gandhi, they know, at least in Argentina, everybody knows about Gandhi. And I'm not exaggerating.
Dr. Leah Diskin?
Is not the point, unfortunately, here in Brazil. Most of the people feel that Gandhi was a saint, some kind of mythology personality, and really no humankind and human being with all the lights and all the darks. This is the most important thing that we are trying to teach, that Gandhi was a human, was a man with all, absolutely all the virtues and also all the lack of virtues. Something that I would like to appoint about the colonization in Latin America is not the colonization, for instance, that we have in India. India had a lot of invasion from a lot of people around the area, but always find some kind of cultural structure, some kind of spiritual beliefs. When Spanish and Portuguese people came from Latin America, he decimated all the native people. And also the native people don't have one strong condition to put in only one frame all their beliefs. They live in these countries, for instance, in Brazil, with a teeny parts of the territory without communication. Then when Portuguese arrived here, simply cut all the heads. And the other way was to slavery, to put the native of slavery works. This is important to put in mind, because we don't have inner resistance to such a brutal force. And perhaps our Argentinian Leah can explain the things about General Roca. General Roca say exactly the same with the native Argentinian population. Please, can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Thank you, Leah. Effectively, General Roca was a president, the famous 80s generation in Argentina. That was many intellectuals from the elite that chose the model of European immigration they were looking for the North European immigration, but the European immigration who came to the country was from Spain and Italy. And so some anarchists came to the country also, and they assassinated many native people in Argentina. And also up to today, we have different legal instances on that situation. It was really terrible. But I think it's always interpolating us, because in Argentina, if you come, you have always the tension between, well, Ambassador knows this, about the European model and the pretension and the imaginary we have that we descend from ships. That's not true, but we insist on that. And another part of the society who defend the native population we had. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, it's interesting. We have 3 speakers from Latin America, of which the 2 LIAS countries had lived under dictatorship, military dictatorship. And they had created even new words in Spanish vocabulary. Like when somebody asked General Videla about some kid who was abducted by the military, what happened to them, he said, ni muerto, ni vivo, simplemente desaparecido. They are not dead, they are not alive, they've just disappeared. So this word desaparecido is a new Argentine military dictator invention. But fortunately, Mexico had been free from these military dictatorships. Not only that, all those who were pulled from exile, sent on exile from Argentina and Brazil and Uruguay, Chile and these countries, and Mexico gave asylum, refuge to all these people who took, sought asylum from the military dictatorships, including Gabriel Garcia Marquez. But of course, they had a different kind of dictatorship, which Maria Vargas Llosa calls it as the perfect dictatorship of one-party dictatorship. But now you have changed. You went to PAN and now you have got AMLO. So let us hear the different perspective from Mexico.
Yes, for the case, for the case of Latin America, yes, Mexico is a different, it has been in a different situation. As you say, we didn't have a dictatorship as such. However, we had this very long-term government led by one party, the PRI, no, the Revolutionary Institutional Party. So, there was also repression during this period, this long period. And people also had to implement different kind of strategies. To be honest, I'm not quite sure if they were inspired by Gandhian philosophy on nonviolence. However, I could say that nowadays the president we have, to some extent, the struggle he has developed through his political trajectory has some reverberations of non-violence resistance, of passive resistance, with all, not exactly as such, but we can find kind of reminiscences there, no? And also people that have been accompanying him during his struggle, they display these strategies of non-violence, no? And he always has made a strong call to keep going through to pacifist strategies. But I'm not quite sure. In many of his discourses, he has referred to Gandhi's ideas on Pacific on civil resistance. But I wouldn't say he's Gandhian. However, he has this kind of reminiscence. No. And basically that, and for instance, well, as you were saying at the beginning, Ambassador Viswanathan, that we in Latin America, we are a region that unfortunately is very much affected by violence, no? And as you know, in terms of gender violence, the problem is massive. So I think that Gandhi's ideas on educating male and female sectors are valid, are very pertinent, are convenient in order to try to eradicate or reduce this problem we have in terms of gender violence. No, it is not enough. I know it is not enough to have a pedagogy about equal rights and equal status. No, because it is a systemic issue, gender inequality. However, I think we have to use every possible strategy, and we have to look at the different fronts of this problem, which is multifactorial, in order to start reducing it and eventually eradicate it from the region and from the world. No.
Thank you. Yeah, there is a. Yeah, go ahead.
Chair, I would just also point out our panelist from Costa Rica, Oscar Alvarez Araya, has also joined us.
Oh, let's give the floor quickly to him. Where is he? Running out of time.
Can I start?
Yeah, welcome. Please, we are waiting for you. Pura vida.
Okay. Mr. Vice President of India, dear friends, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born in Porbandar, current state of Gujarat in India, on October the 2nd, 1869. He was a lawyer, an Indian political leader of the anarchistic orientation, and a pacifist. He was a Freemason and maximum leader of the independence movement for India regarding the British Empire, utilizing methods of civil disobedience, fasting, prayer, and non-cooperation and non-violence. He was father of modern India, one of the founders of the largest democracy on the planet. He belonged to the Vaishya ethnicity, and his religion, instilled by his parents and teachers, was Hinduism. Also, he was later influenced by Christianity and Theosophy. He was characterized by the deep respect and tolerance toward other religions. He was married at the age of 13 to Kasturba Gandhi in a marriage arranged by their parents, and had 4 children. He studied law at University College of London and practiced as a lawyer. He also lived in South Africa. In 1896, he was attacked and beaten by white South Africans, which sensitized him on themes of justice. His great sources of wisdom were the Bhagavad Gita, the Gospels, the books of the Russian noble and Christian anarchist Leo Tolstoy, and the North American anarchist Henry David Thoreau. He was assassinated in New Delhi, India on January the 30th, 1948, while on his way to a prayer session. India and the world are celebrating the 150th anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, the great leader of the Indian movement, with non-violence as the weapon for the struggle against colonialism. In our speech, we refer to the influence, affinities, and legacy of Mahatma Gandhi in Latin America. The writer, intellectual, teacher, journalist, and Salvadorian politician Alberto Masferrer was a contemporary and deeply impacted by Mahatma Gandhi about his social, political, and spiritual ideas. Just like Gandhi, he was swayed by social democracy, Christianity, the Theosophy Society, and by anarchistic protagonists like Leo Tolstoy, Proudhon, and Kropotkin. Likewise, he promoted the struggle for Latin Americans' independence and respect for the powers, as well as the individual rights and social justice with peaceful methods like non-violence. Even during the farmer uprising in 1932 in El Salvador, he tried to avoid and contain the web of violence. He was a vitalist of the Eastern tendency influenced by Gandhi as well as Judy Krishnamurti. The politician and Peruvian thinker Victor Raúl Aya de la Torre was also a contemporary with marked tendencies and affinities with Gandhi. He founded the American Revolutionary Popular Alliance in Mexico to fight for democracy, political unity and independence, respect for powers, colonies and neocolonies. Just like Gandhi, he had been exposed to anarchical syndicalism during his youth. In 1928, Aya de la Torre was harbored in Costa Rica, giving conference and promoting the foundation of the APRA Society, presided by the Costa Rican Joaquín García Monge. In 1932, Aya was jailed in Peru, and before an imminent firing squad, various worldwide figures cried out for his life, among others Albert Einstein, Romain Rolland, and Mahatma Gandhi. The writer, lawyer, politician, and Mexican philosopher José Vasconcelos was a fighter against the dictatorship of Porfirio Díaz, as well as an activist in favor of the Mexican Revolution and Latin American independence. He was the first education minister for Mexico. Up to this point, we note his affinities and agreement with Gandhi's thinking. Gabriela Mistral, the Literature Nobel Prize winner, poet, teacher, and Chilean diplomat, similarly to Gandhi, had great interest and concern for indigenous people and reclaimed the importance of unity and independence of peoples regarding colonial powers. She was a theosophist, another bridge that joined her to Gandhi, who, without being a member of the Theosophical Society, her effect was recognized in the spiritual and social ideas. Like other theosophists, Gandhi said, "There is no religion higher than truth." At least 3 Costa Ricans at that time were impacted and or had an affinity with Mahatma Gandhi. Joaquín García Monge, who was born in Desamparados in 1881, he was the founder and director of the American Repertory magazine, and similarly to Gandhi, he was a disciple of the Russian novel Leo Tolstoy. His ideas were notorious and evidently from a Gandhian perspective, that it is to say, non-violent. Also, the distinguished citizen Roberto Brenes Mesen was a contemporary of Gandhi. Both placed a weight on close dates, the first in 1947 and Gandhi in 1948. He was a member of the Theosophical Society as well as the Costa Rican Masonry, with social and spiritual ideas similar to Gandhi. Likewise, Omar Dengo, who was anarchist origins with tendencies from Tolstoy, Proudhon, Bakunin, and Kropotkin, and then became more moderate and evolved to be both a theosophist and a Mason, along with the arrival of theosophical ideas into the country, came Gandhi's recognition in personalities such as Omar Dengo and Roberto Brenes Mesen. For Gandhi, his religion was practiced in love, non-violence, and service the homeless. According to what he wrote, the state represents violence in a concentrated and organized form. Then, backing the state is backing violence and is going against religious principles. Therefore, it is from his Hindu base that anarchist deals are born. That is to say, a society without a state, without government, and without violence. Finally, an ahimsa society. In the world he conceived and dreams of the possibility of a society without a state and therefore without violence, that state, he says, does not exist anywhere, and it may appear it will be in India. As the ideal cannot be achieved, he quotes the North American Henry David Thoreau, "The government is best which governs least." In the end, the ideal will be an ahimsa society, without violence and without government, and in the case that this may not be possible, one must opt for the closest society to one's ideal, with the most limited government possible. So that a non-violent society or state may exist, Gandhi proposed in his book to do away with the army, saying we can fix ourselves just fine without an army. What the Indian leader did not know, because he was assassinated in 1948, was that in Latin America, in a far-off Costa Rica, and under the influence and inspiration of his ideas, and in the 1949 Constitution, the army was to be abolished as a permanent institution, and thus Costa Rica became the first country in the world without armed forces. Gandhi's ideas has directly entered by means of his books, by newspapers, and his inspiring leadership, and also through his ascendancy, the Theosophical Society and the Masonic Lodge, spread his spiritual and social ideas. In this way, Costa Rica was becoming a country with ahimsa ideas, until years later, when the Inter-American Court of Human Rights was established, and subsequently the United Nations University for Peace, on whose location a statue and photo of Mahatma Gandhi was erected as a great inspirer of this worldwide academic center. Later, on the then president of Costa Rica, Oscar Arias Sanchez, received in the name of Costa Rica the Nobel Peace Prize for this peace plan and his enormous effort and achievements in the pacification of Central America during the decade of 80s during the last century. A little later, during a visit to India, Oscar Arias visited the Gandhi Mausoleum in New Delhi, taking a floral offering of appreciation and recognition of the monumental impact that Gandhi had on his peace plan and non-violence for Central America. Upon celebrating the 150th anniversary of the birth of Mahatma Gandhi, we pay tribute and recognize his huge influence and inspiration for the Latin American struggles for unity, democracy, independence, human rights, and peace, using non-violent and civil methods and ahimsa philosophy. I conclude with one of the celebrated phrases from Gandhi: "There is no path to peace. Peace is the path." Thank you, Mahatma Gandhi, teacher of wisdom and eternity. Thank you very much.
Gracias. Drupjad, since we are up for time, so we won't take any more questions. Shall I conclude?
Yes, sir, you can conclude, sir. If there is
Okay. Okay, since it's already 7:45, well, we were glad to have Dr. Araya from Costa Rica. Gandhi would have been proud of Costa Rica and said Pura Vida. Because while many individuals around the world got inspiration from Gandhi, as a country, Costa Rica was the one who put into practice peace. It's a role model. It's a global pioneer for the whole world and an inspiration. Not only violence against other human beings, but also against nature. Today, Costa Rica is a global leader and pioneer in sustainable development and renewable energy. 99% of the energy is renewable energy. And it was one of the very first countries which combined the Ministry of Energy and Environment and introduced carbon tax. And the income from that is used to protect forests. It's an amazing example. Thank you very much. Now, in my introduction, I talked about Gandhi's non-violence, got the attention of the reality of violence in Latin America. And I said there were three kinds of violence: state violence, people's violence, revolutionary violence, and criminal violence. Now the state violence is now almost disappeared. Now military dictatorships is a thing of the past. Now democracies have taken root and have become strong across the country. Now the people who took up arms like Jose Mujica and Dilma Rousseff, they became presidents of their countries. So there is no more armed insurgent. The only thing remains is criminal violence of drug traffickers and the gangs. Now, Latin America cannot solve these because the root, the origin, the cause for these problems are United States. Because the drug is a business, a billion-dollar business, hundreds of billions of dollars, is driven by US consumption. Millions of Americans consume, and the number has not gone down even after Escobar was shot down. The number is increasing. Millions of Americans keep consuming drugs, paying billions of dollars to Colombia and Mexico and more. Last year, United States trafficked illegally 200,000 weapons to Mexico alone. Most of the guns used in the violence in Central America and Mexico, they are all American guns. In the whole of Mexico, there is only one gun shop. But in the US border with Mexico, there are thousands of gun shops which are selling weapons, which are going. So, this criminal violence will be stopped only when the consumption, consumer-driven business of drugs is stopped in the United States. We hope that better sense will prevail. But I don't want to end with a pessimistic tone of success stories like Costa Rica, which remains an island of peace in an ocean of violence in Central America, the northern triangle of violence. Now, we have this example of Medellin. Medellin in Colombia was a murder capital. It had one of the highest murder rates in the world. It was the narco trafficking capital with Pablo Escobar. And it gave a bad reputation to the whole Colombia as a failed state. Medellin has completely transformed. Today it's a peaceful place. It's a vibrant place of like a Silicon Valley. It has become a Silicon Valley for the whole of Latin America, with so many young people working and vibrant business and peace. Now, they achieved this by this bridging the two languages of Jockey Club and the streets. The city of Medellin went to the barrios, to the slums with metro cable. They connected them and they said, you are part of us. You are stakeholders in our city and in our country. And they gave ownership of the city and country to the poor people, and who developed a sense of belonging with this metro cable reaching the last part of their barrio. And today, Medellin is a successful example of how a city which was known as murder capital and drug capital can completely transform itself into a peaceful and vibrant place. With that, I thank all our panelists and thank ICWA for organizing this event. Thank you. Gracias. Obrigado.
Gracias. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, participants. With this, we come to the end of day one. Thank you all for your active participation. We have had some very fruitful discussions throughout the day. It has been a long day. We have started at 9:40 in the morning. We look forward to welcoming you tomorrow again for the concluding day of the webinar. Do join us tomorrow morning at 10 hours Indian Standard Time. Hope to see you all then. Have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Hasta la mañana.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.